The Crimson Fleet arrives. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been mining asteroids in the Kuiper Belt for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The deep space vessel Perseverance shuddered as every sensor on the ship screamed warnings into the cold vacuum of space. Sarah's weathered hands gripped the command chair as she stared at the impossible readings flooding her screens. "Captain, you need to see this," called out her communications officer, Lieutenant Tom Bradley, his voice cracking with tension. The young man had joined her crew straight from the academy, full of dreams about exploring the final frontier. Right now, he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the universe. Sarah pushed herself toward the main display, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal deck plates. What she saw there made her stomach drop like a stone falling through Earth's atmosphere. Hundreds of massive shapes were emerging from what appeared to be empty space, their hulls gleaming crimson against the starfield. Each vessel was easily 10 times larger than Earth's biggest space stations, and they moved with the precision of a military formation that had been drilling for centuries. "Computer, run a deep scan analysis," Sarah commanded, her voice steady, despite the fear crawling up her spine. She had learned long ago that panic was a luxury no ship captain could afford, especially not when her crew was looking to her for answers she didn't have. "Scan complete, Captain." The ship's artificial intelligence responded in its calm, synthesized voice. "I am detecting 847 vessels of unknown configuration. Hull composition appears to be a crystalline metal alloy beyond current human manufacturing capabilities. Each ship is approximately 2 kilometers in length. No matches found in any known HFY database." Tom looked up from his station, his face pale in the blue glow of the ship's emergency lighting. "Captain, they're not responding to standard communication protocols. I've tried everything. Radio waves, laser communications, even the old Arecibo message sequences, nothing." Sarah felt ice forming in her veins. In all her years working the outer system, she had never encountered anything that didn't respond to human communication attempts. Pirates, corporate raiders, even the most paranoid mining consortiums would at least acknowledge a hail. This silence felt different. It felt deliberate. "Tom, get me a priority channel to Earth Command. Use the quantum relay if you have to. Lieutenant Karen Wu, I need you to plot us a course back toward Mars. Best possible speed." Wu, her navigation officer, was already working at her console before Sarah finished speaking. The woman had served on patrol ships before joining the mining crew, and her military training was showing. "Course plotted, Captain, but at maximum burn it'll take us 18 hours to reach Mars orbital stations." "Do it," Sarah ordered. "And Tom, tell Earth Command we have a code black situation. Unknown vessels, massive fleet, heading toward the inner system." As the Perseverance changed course and began accelerating toward home, the alien fleet continued its steady approach toward Earth. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing dread. The formation was too perfect, too organized. This wasn't a group of explorers or traders. This was an invasion force. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself on a secure communication link with Admiral Patricia Hayes at Earth Defense Command. The Admiral was a legend in the space service, a woman who had helped design humanity's first interplanetary defense protocols. If anyone could make sense of this situation, it would be her. "Captain Mitchell, your data has been confirmed by our deep space monitoring stations. We're tracking 847 vessels, possibly more arriving hourly. They'll reach Earth's orbital space in approximately 15 hours. Admiral Hayes paused, and Sarah could see the weight of command settling on the older woman's shoulders. "Captain, in your professional opinion, are we looking at a first contact scenario or a hostile invasion?" Sarah had been dreading this question. "Admiral, their formation suggests military organization. They're not responding to communication attempts, and they're approaching Earth directly without any attempt at establishing peaceful contact protocols. In my experience, peaceful explorers don't travel in battle formations." The Admiral nodded grimly. "That's what our analysts are saying too. Captain, I'm ordering you to continue toward Mars and dock at Olympus Station. We may need experienced deep space personnel for what's coming." As the communication ended, Sarah looked around at her crew. Tom was monitoring the alien fleet's approach. Wu was fine-tuning their course toward Mars, and her engineer Marcus Rodriguez was making sure their aging ship could handle the extended high-speed burn. They were miners, not soldiers, but they were about to become humanity's early warning system for what might be the most important day in human history. Back on Earth, the news of the approaching fleet had reached the highest levels of government within hours. President Marcus Thompson sat in the Situation Room beneath the White House, surrounded by military advisors, scientists, and diplomats. The room had been designed to handle global crises, but no one had ever imagined a crisis quite like this. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, you're our leading expert on theoretical xenobiology. What are we dealing with here? President Thompson asked the small woman sitting across from him. Dr. Rodriguez had spent her career studying the possibility of alien life and preparing first contact protocols that everyone hoped would never be needed. Mr. President, the formation and approach pattern suggests a highly advanced civilization with significant military capabilities. The fact that they're approaching openly rather than attempting stealth indicates they either want us to see them coming or they're so confident in their superiority that they don't consider us a threat. General Robert Stone, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward. Doctor, bottom line, are we looking at conquest? Dr. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical displays showing the alien fleet's approach. General, in all our theoretical models for first contact, we considered many possibilities. Peaceful exploration, scientific exchange, resource trading, even accidental contact. But a fleet this size approaching this directly? Yes, I believe we're looking at conquest. As if summoned by her words, every communication device in the Situation Room suddenly activated. Phones rang, tablets chimed, and the main display screen flickered to life with an incoming transmission. Similar scenes were playing out across the globe as the alien signal overrode every communication satellite, every internet connection, every radio and television broadcast on Earth. The face that appeared on screens worldwide was both beautiful and terrifying. The alien had pale silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the light, large eyes that were completely black and features that were almost human, but wrong in subtle ways that made humans instinctively uncomfortable. When it spoke, the words came. In perfect English, though the voice had a musical quality that sounded like wind chimes made of metal. Greetings, inhabitants of the world you call Earth. I am Commander Zektar of the Zephyrian Empire. Your planet has been selected for integration into our domain. President Thompson felt his blood turn cold. Integration didn't sound like partnership or cooperation. It sounded like absorption. The Zephyrian Empire has brought order and purpose to 342 worlds across this galaxy. Each civilization initially believed they were unique, that their world was special, that they possessed some quality that would allow them to resist our authority. All learned the futility of such beliefs. Commander Zektar's image was replaced by recordings of other worlds, beautiful planets with gleaming cities, then the same worlds reduced to smoking ruins. Cities that had once housed millions were now empty wastelands of glass and twisted metal. Your species demonstrates certain primitive but potentially useful qualities. Your technology, while laughably inferior to our own, shows creative applications that may serve the Empire's purposes. Therefore, you are being offered the opportunity to surrender peacefully and accept our guidance toward a more civilized existence. Dr. Rodriguez gripped the table so hard her knuckles went white. The alien's casual dismissal of human achievement, the assumption that humanity would simply surrender, filled her with a rage she had never experienced before. You have 96 of your standard hours to consider our generous offer. At the end of this period, you will broadcast your unconditional surrender and prepare to receive our administrative forces. Resistance will result in the complete sterilization of your planet and the extinction of your species. The transmission showed more images of destroyed worlds, entire star systems reduced to empty space where planets had once orbited their suns. Do not mistake our patience for weakness, Commander Zektar concluded. The Zephyrian Empire has never failed to claim a world we have chosen. Your planet will be no exception. Consider carefully. You have 96 hours. The transmission ended, leaving humanity staring at blank screens and contemplating extinction. The Situation Room was silent for A long moment, the weight of the ultimatum settling over everyone present. President Thompson was the first to speak. 96 hours, ladies and gentlemen. 4 days to decide the fate of our species. He looked around the table at the assembled leaders of humanity's defense. I want options, military options, diplomatic options, any options you can think of. General Stone stood up, his jaw set with determination. Mr. President, with all due respect, I don't think there's much to consider here. The United States military doesn't surrender to threats, and neither does humanity. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her notes. General, they've conquered 342 worlds. Their technology is obviously centuries ahead of ours. Maybe we should consider negotiation, find some way to coexist that doesn't involve complete surrender but avoids total annihilation. Coexist? General Stone's voice rose. Doctor, did you see those images? There's no coexistence with an empire that turns entire planets into glass. They're not here to share the neighborhood. They're here to own it. As the debate continued in the Situation Room, similar conversations were happening in government, buildings around the world. In Beijing, Premier Li Wei was meeting with his military council. In London, Prime Minister Sarah Davies was consulting with her cabinet. In Moscow, President Volkov was reviewing Russia's nuclear capabilities. Every world leader was grappling with the same impossible choice: surrender and hope for mercy, or fight and face certain destruction. But something else was happening that the aliens might not have expected. For the first time in human history, ancient enemies were putting aside their differences to face a common threat. The United States was sharing military technology with China. Russia was coordinating with NATO. Nations that had been on the brink of war just days before were now planning joint operations against an enemy from the stars. In homes around the world, ordinary people were making extraordinary choices. Engineers were designing weapons from household materials. Teachers were organizing evacuation plans that looked more like guerrilla warfare manuals. Construction workers were building fortifications. Farmers were hiding food supplies. Everywhere, humans were refusing to accept defeat. Captain Sarah Mitchell, still racing toward Mars aboard the Perseverance, received updates from Earth as the planet prepared for war. The mining captain, who had just wanted to extract valuable minerals from asteroids, was now watching her species prepare for its greatest challenge. Captain, Tom called from his communication station, I'm picking up transmissions from all over Earth. Military units are being mobilized, civilian defense forces are forming, and, Captain, they're not talking about surrender. They're talking about fighting. Sarah looked at the tactical display showing the approaching alien fleet. 847 massive ships against humanity's few hundred outdated patrol vessels, orbital platforms, and surface-based weapons. Any rational analysis said humanity had no chance, but as she listened to the determination in the voices coming from Earth, Sarah began to understand something that the Zephyrian Empire might have overlooked. Humans weren't rational when cornered. They were dangerous. As the 96-hour countdown began, Earth transformed. Every factory began producing weapons. Every university began researching alien technology based on the sensor readings from Captain Mitchell's ship. Every military base became a center of desperate innovation. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 342 worlds, but they had never encountered a species quite like humanity. They were about to learn why the universe had been quiet for so long around Sol System, and why perhaps it had been wise to leave the third planet alone. The countdown continued, but Earth was no longer waiting passively for conquest. Humanity was preparing to deliver a message that would echo across the galaxy, a warning that some species were too dangerous to conquer, too stubborn to surrender, and too determined to ever accept defeat. The Empire had turned its gaze on Earth, expecting easy prey. Instead, they were about to receive a lesson in why humans had earned their place among the stars not through superior technology or peaceful exploration, but through an unbreakable will to survive and a refusal to bow to any master, no matter how powerful. The warning was coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. The warning that shook the galaxy. 72 hours into the countdown, the Zephyrian Empire received their first surprise. Instead of desperate surrender negotiations or chaotic panic, Earth's communications were filled with something Commander Zektar had never encountered in 342 conquests: organized, methodical preparation for asymmetric warfare. Aboard the flagship, Eternal Dominance, Commander Zektar studied the intelligence reports with growing confusion. The humans weren't behaving according to any pattern in the Empire's extensive conquest database. They weren't massing their primitive fleets for doomed direct confrontation. They weren't building massive defensive installations. Instead, they were doing something that made no tactical sense at all. "Sub-Commander Veltan," Zektar called to his intelligence officer, "explain these readings. The humans appear to be dispersing their military assets rather than concentrating them. Are they abandoning their planet?" Sub-Commander Veltan, a career military analyst who had studied the fall of dozens of worlds, shook his head in bewilderment. "Commander, our analysts are equally puzzled. Instead of evacuating, they're distributing weapons and supplies to civilian populations. They're creating thousands of small autonomous cells rather than maintaining centralized command structures. It's illogical." What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that humanity had learned hard lessons from their own history. Every human, schoolchild, knew about the French resistance, the Vietnam War, the Afghan conflicts. They understood that when facing overwhelmingly superior conventional forces, survival came through adaptation, not confrontation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been appointed as Earth's chief strategic coordinator, a position that didn't exist a week ago, but was now the most important job on the planet. Working with military leaders from every nation, she had helped design something the galaxy had never seen: a planetary resistance network designed to function without central leadership. The key insight, Dr. Rodriguez explained to the assembled leaders via secure quantum communication, is that the Zephyrians think hierarchically. Every empire they've conquered had centralized governments, unified command structures, predictable response patterns. We're not giving them anything predictable to target. In New York, construction crews were installing hidden weapon caches in subway tunnels. In Tokyo, electronics engineers were building electromagnetic pulse devices from commercial equipment. In Cairo, archaeologists were using their knowledge of ancient defensive structures to design modern guerrilla bases. In São Paulo, biochemists were developing non-lethal but incapacitating agents that could affect alien physiology based on the atmospheric samples left by the Zephyrian transmissions. But the most important development was happening in a small laboratory in Geneva, where a young engineer named Kai Chen had made a discovery that would change everything. Kai had been analyzing the quantum signatures of the Zephyrian ships when he noticed something others had missed. The alien vessels were powerful, but they relied on a form of energy cascade that required constant synchronization across the entire fleet. It was an elegant system that made them incredibly efficient in conventional warfare, but it had a critical weakness that only became apparent when examining hundreds of ships simultaneously. "Dr. Rodriguez," Kai called excitedly from his workstation, "I think I found something. The Zephyrian ships aren't just networked for communication, they're networked for power distribution. If we could disrupt the synchronization pattern..." Dr. Rodriguez rushed to his station, her heart racing. "Show me." Kai pulled up his analysis, highlighting the energy patterns flowing between the alien ships. "Look at this. They're sharing power across the entire fleet through quantum field resonance. It makes them incredibly efficient, but if the synchronization is disrupted, the feedback could cascade through their entire network." "Are you saying we could disable their entire fleet?" "Not disable," Kai corrected, his eyes bright with possibility. "But we could force them to choose between maintaining their power network or protecting individual ships. Either way, it changes the tactical situation completely." Within hours, Kai's discovery was being analyzed by physicists around the world. The plan that emerged was audacious, desperate, and completely insane by conventional military standards. It was, in other words, perfectly human. As the 96-hour deadline approached, President Thompson prepared humanity's response. But this wouldn't be a message of surrender or defiance. This would be something the Zephyrian Empire had never heard before: a warning. Standing in what had once been the United Nations General Assembly Hall, now converted into a global communications center, President Thompson addressed not just the alien fleet, but every inhabited world in the galaxy. Earth's most powerful transmitters were broadcasting on frequencies that would carry across interstellar space, ensuring that hundreds of civilizations would hear humanity's message. Commander Zektar of the Zephyrian Empire, you offered us 96 hours to consider surrender. We have considered it. President Thompson's voice was steady, but it carried the weight of an entire species' determination. Our answer is no. Aboard the Eternal Dominance, Commander Zektar felt his first flutter of concern. In 342 conquests, no species had ever refused surrender at this stage. There was something in the human leader's tone that was different from the desperate defiance he had heard from other worlds. You spoke of 342 conquered worlds, Commander Zektar. You may have noticed that this makes us number 343. But here's something you should understand about humans. We've been fighting impossible odds since we first stood upright on the African savanna. President Thompson gestured to screens showing images from human history. Not images of surrender or defeat, but images of humanity rising from every catastrophe stronger than before. We've survived ice ages that should have killed us. We've survived plagues that wiped out most of our population. We've survived world wars, natural disasters, and extinction events that would have ended weaker species. We didn't survive because we were the strongest or the smartest. We survived because we never knew when to quit. On Zephyrian ships throughout the fleet, alarm systems began sounding. Kaichen's disruption signal, transmitted from hidden arrays on Earth's moon, was beginning to interfere with their power synchronization network. The effect was subtle at first, just minor fluctuations in efficiency, but it was growing stronger. You assumed we would react like the other species you've conquered, Commander. You assumed we would see your superior numbers and advanced technology and surrender out of logic and self-preservation. But you made a critical error in your assessment. President Thompson paused, looking directly into the camera that was broadcasting to the galaxy. You don't understand humans at all. The disruption signal reached critical resonance. Across the Zephyrian fleet, power systems began fluctuating wildly. Ships that had been networked for maximum efficiency suddenly found themselves isolated, their shared power grid collapsing into chaos. We're the species that looked at the ocean and decided to cross it in wooden boats. We're the species that looked at the sky and decided to fly. We're the species that looked at other worlds and decided to visit them. And now we're the species that's looking at your empire and deciding it's time for it to end. Commander Zektar watched in horror as his perfectly organized fleet began to break apart. Ships were losing power. Formation integrity was collapsing, and his sub-commanders were reporting system failures across the entire armada. Sub-Commander Velton, what is happening to our fleet? Commander, we're detecting some kind of interference pattern. It appears to be disrupting our quantum field resonance. How did primitive humans develop this technology? But President Thompson wasn't finished with his message. For the benefit of every civilization listening to this broadcast, let me tell you what the Zephyrian Empire doesn't want you to know. They're not invincible. Their technology has weaknesses. Their tactics are predictable. And most importantly, they can be stopped. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had lived in fear of the Zephyrian Empire for centuries were listening to impossible words. Species that had surrendered without fighting were hearing that resistance was possible. Worlds that had accepted conquest were learning that the Empire could be defeated. To the Zephyrian Empire, this is your warning. Turn around now. Leave our system. Tell the galaxy that Earth is off limits, because if you choose to proceed with this invasion, you won't be fighting the humans you expected. You'll be fighting every human who ever refused to surrender, every human who ever stood up to a bully, every human who ever chose to die on their feet rather than live on their knees. The disruption signal reached maximum intensity. Throughout the Zephyrian fleet, ships were being forced to choose between maintaining their formation or protecting their individual systems. The perfect military machine that had conquered hundreds of worlds was falling apart. And to every civilization listening to this broadcast, remember this day. Remember that the Zephyrian Empire retreated from a single world, Remember that their technology can be defeated. Remember that empires fall when enough people refuse to bow. Commander Zektar made a decision that went against every doctrine in the Zephyrian military handbook. Faced with the complete collapse of his fleet's operational integrity and the impossible resistance of a primitive species, he gave an order that no Zephyrian commander had ever given. All ships withdraw to minimum safe distance. We are reassessing our approach to this system. But President Thompson had one final message for the Empire. Commander Zektar, you mentioned that you've never failed to claim a world you've chosen. Today, that record ends. But more than that, you've awakened something that was sleeping peacefully in this quiet corner of the galaxy. Humanity is now aware that we're not alone, and we're not impressed with what we found. Earth will not join your empire, but we have a counteroffer. Any world that wants to break free from Zephyrian control now knows it's possible. Any species that wants to fight back now knows there are allies in the galaxy. Any civilization that's tired of living under your rule now knows that the Empire can be beaten. As the Zephyrian fleet withdrew in disorder, something unprecedented happened. Across the galaxy, worlds that had been silent for centuries began broadcasting messages of support to Earth. Species that had been conquered long ago started transmitting technical data about Zephyrian weaknesses. Civilizations that had never met humans began reaching out with offers of alliance. The warning had been heard, and the galaxy was responding. 6 months later, Captain Sarah Mitchell found herself commanding not a mining vessel, but the first ship in humanity's deep space exploration fleet. Earth had become the unofficial headquarters of what was being called the Free Worlds Alliance, a growing coalition of species that had either broken away from the Zephyrian Empire or were actively resisting its expansion. Captain, Lieutenant, Tom Bradley called from his new position as communications coordinator. We're receiving another transmission from the Andromedan Resistance. They're reporting successful raids on 3 more Zephyrian supply depots. Sarah smiled as she looked out at the stars. A year ago, humanity had been alone in the galaxy, focused on mining asteroids and building colonies. Now they were part of something much larger. A growing movement that was changing the balance of power across dozens of star systems. The Zephyrian Empire still controlled hundreds of worlds, but their expansion had stopped. More importantly, their reputation for invincibility had been shattered. Other species were learning that resistance was possible, that advanced technology could be overcome by ingenuity and determination, that empires fell when enough people refused to accept oppression. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now serving as Earth's first ambassador to the galactic community, often reflected on how first contact had turned out so differently than anyone had expected. Instead of humanity being inducted into an existing galactic civilization, they had become the catalyst for rebuilding one based on freedom rather than conquest. Commander Zektar, meanwhile, had been reassigned to a quiet administrative post in the outer rim of Zephyrian space. His report on the Earth incident had been classified and buried in the Empire's archives, but word had spread anyway. Other commanders now approached unknown worlds with much more caution, and several had requested transfers rather than risk encountering another species like humanity. The warning had been delivered, and the galaxy had listened. Earth was no longer a quiet world in an empty system. It had become the symbol of resistance to tyranny, the proof that no empire was permanent, and the beacon of hope for anyone who believed that freedom was worth fighting for. The Zephyrian Empire had turned its gaze on Earth expecting easy conquest. Instead, they had awakened a species that would spend the next century teaching the galaxy a simple but powerful lesson. Some fights are worth having, regardless of the odds, and sometimes the smallest voice can echo across the stars loud enough to shatter empires. Humanity had delivered its warning, and the universe would never be the same.